Good morning, everybody. We're ready to get started with the Ohio Collaborative meeting. Thank you again. My name is Karen Huey. I'm the chair. And this is our first in-person meeting in quite some time, so it's really wonderful to see faces. We do have some of our board members joining us by teams. I think Reverend Moss, is that it that's on?
And Brenda, we have a guest.
Okay. Very good. So again, thanks everybody for being here. And again, it's really nice to see everybody's faces. So, just to remind everybody, as we concluded our last collaborative meeting, we chose to move forward with a juvenile standard. That's something that the staff and folks are working on. We'll hear a little bit of a presentation today from our school resource officer that will give us a little bit more perspective on that as we continue to build out that standard. So that's one of the things that we're talking about. And then also, in light of all the D&I efforts that are going on across the state, whether it's, we here at Public Safety, we have our D&I coordinator here, Valerie Gladden. We've been doing a lot of work internally. I know departments are all focused on this, so we're going to have a presentation today from the Franklin County Sheriff's Office on their D&I and Columbus State as well, their D&I efforts. So I look forward to hearing those presentations. We've been really busy at Public Safety. We're mostly back in the office, still working some hybrid schedules, but things have really, really picked up and we're pretty busy. At the same time, we pay so close attention, as everyone does, to the COVID numbers. It keeps our EMA division very busy. Their mission numbers have gone up. At the same time, they're dealing with the natural disasters across the country, providing a lot of support to IDA survivors, and seeing how they can be helpful. The National Guard's been activated, Task Force 1. So EMA has been keeping very busy. Another thing that we're focused on here at Public Safety is ARPA dollars. ARPA dollars are coming into the state. I know they're coming into your local communities as well. But those are going to be funds that I think can help out a lot of efforts in public safety. So we're trying to reach out to all of our partners and have some good discussions about how we can identify funding going forward, things that were COVID related, the areas that were impacted in public safety by COVID, and how can we move forward and perhaps be transformational as we go forward with those items as well. Something that I've been sort of busy with a little bit lately is I participated on some national calls that are discussing the Afghan refugees that will be coming back into the country. So we have, as most of you know, they've come into 2 airports, Dulles and Philly, and then they get, those folks are dispersed to military bases across the country. Probably the closest one to Ohio is the Indiana military base where folks are moving to. Once they go through their medical checks and processing, they'll be relocated to refugee resettlement centers. In Ohio, we have 8 of those designated centers. Most of those are around our larger cities. But anyway, we're kind of keeping an eye on that because we want to help be careful or provide communication and help make that a smooth and comfortable transition for folks that are coming into the state. So that's something, just getting information from the federal government is helpful, and as we get more, we'll pass that along to everybody. And then again, I just want to, I'm excited to hear our presentations today on the juvenile standard, and then also D&I. And those are my opening remarks. Carlton, I don't know if you have anything you want to add or if you want to jump in. Or
I'll just echo your comments about how we are busy, but it is great to see everyone in person again. It's amazing how much seeing people you just took for granted, like, I'll just see you at the next meeting, and then 18 months later, I said hi to Mayor Bell earlier, and he said, well, it's nice to finally meet you, because we've only met virtually for the last year or so. So it's great to see everyone in person. We have obviously a lot of work that needs to get done, a lot of important work, and certainly we continue to do the work of the collaborative even while we were meeting virtually. We're trying to make sure we get Pastor Moss set up. he could not be with us today, but was able to take advantage, or hopefully take advantage of being able to utilize Teams. I want to just mention, before we get to the presentation from Officer Dressler. So, you know, we've had this conversation about a juvenile standard for a couple years now. And, you know, going back a few years ago, or a couple years ago, when we had a very different collaborative board, and we had a presentation from Dr. Celeste. And then but we did not pass a standard at that time, and we continued to have discussions about it internally to try to figure out if the best way to move forward is to move forward with a policy, with a model policy, or to create a standard. And so we decided again to begin that conversation. I had another presentation from Gabrielle, and I feel like we got kind of the academic perspective on kind of the way the juvenile mind works. And any of you who have teenagers know it works very differently than ours, right? But we also wanted to get a perspective from the field of what it's like to work with juveniles, or when your job really involves daily engagement with juveniles, sometimes in really good settings and sometimes in not so good settings. And so we really wanted to be able to give that presentation to you today. So we do have Officer Scott Dressler here with the Richfield Police Department. He was voted School Resource Officer of the Year back in 2020. And so we're really pleased to have him with us. And so, Scott, I don't know if you want to come up here and begin your presentation. And certainly, you know, he's going to take some time to, and what I asked him to do was just explain his experience and what it's like, give you guys a sense of what he does on a daily basis. And then once he's done with his presentation, everyone will have the opportunity to ask him questions.
First and foremost, thank you. I am beyond honored and humbled to be here, and to even be asked to be here to speak to you guys is quite amazing. By no means am I an expert in anything. I'll just tell you what works for us and what we have done. So let me give you a little bit, introduce myself a little bit. I'm Scott Dressler with the Richfield Police Department. I've been with Richfield for 22 years. I've been SRO, School Resource Officer, for 4 years at the Revere Local School District. We are a shared community, so Bath Township Police Department has 3 schools in their jurisdiction. Richfield has 1 in their jurisdiction, and it's they pay a third of my salary, the school pays a third of my salary, and Richfield pays a third of my salary, and it's collaborative. We work together in the community. Before Richfield, I worked 2 years at North Randall, and before that I was with University Hospitals Police Department for 6 years. I did 12 years as a bailiff part-time in Medina Muni Court, and I taught at the police academies for over 12 years, defensive tactics and subject control. So what we do at Richfield is a little weird, or in Revere. With my, we've had the School Resource Officer program for 8 years. The first 4 years, there was a young man that took it. He was a part-timer with Bath, and they put him in that position. And I was on midnight shift, didn't want to do anything like that at that time. And with him being young, he didn't have the opportunity to interact with the kids as much. You know, he was grateful that he had a full-time job. You know, they didn't respect his opinion and stuff like that. So when I interviewed for the job 4 years ago, my main concern was I want to be an integral part of the school. You know, I don't just want to sit in my car, answer calls, and go to school. I want to be there. I want to be on recess with the kids. I want to visit all the lunches. I want to visit all 4 schools multiple times a day. So everybody bought in, and that was, you know, with my experience and my years on the job, everybody bought in and gave me that liberty. We changed the uniform. I don't wear a normal uniform to work at the schools. My philosophy was thinking, and the chiefs and the superintendent agreed with me, that my philosophy was I want to be more casual. I want to, you know, I don't want to go in there with the big vest and multiple weapons and looking paramilitary, which there's nothing wrong with that. I wanted to be comfortable, and I wanted people to be able to look at me and talk to me as a normal person without looking at what's on my vest and what am I carrying here. And, I carry the normal stuff on my gun belt, but I just wanted to be more normal in a school setting, okay, as opposed to being there with all kinds of everything else on me. So they bought into that, and that's just our preference. That's a community we live in and we work in, and maybe it wouldn't work in other communities, but that's what we did. So what happens on a daily basis is, I report to work. I go to all 4 schools in the morning for arrival and dismissal. And then throughout the day, I visit the lunches, the recesses. I get relationships with these kids. Social media is huge. I follow about 550 kids on social media. I Snapchat. Sometimes that's frowned upon, and I could see where that can get you in trouble playing on social media. But the trust I've built that, I snap with the kids once a day. I'll tell them good morning. All 325 kids that follow me, I tell them good morning, and what day of the week it is. Like, Wednesday, have a safe day today, or something like that, and they snap back. They can message me easy on Instagram and Twitter. I follow their stories, and sometimes it gives me clues of what's going on or what they're feeling. If somebody's depressed, or they're typing at 2 o'clock in the morning saying, FML, or I'm not happy with my life, or whatever. I can interact with them first thing in the morning as soon as they come in. When any of our guys, Richfield or Bath, deal with any of our juveniles, whether it's a traffic ticket, whether it's TP in a house, shooting paintball guns, all the way up to minor criminal, minor drug issues, they'll give me a call, they'll shoot me an email, they'll shoot me the report, say, hey, I dealt with this person last night, give me some background, what's going on with them. And with the relationships I've built in the schools, I know the kids that are going through divorces, have bad home lives, they're depressed, mental issues. This past year with COVID, going, sometimes remote, sometimes full school, online learning, anxiety and depression, it's been huge. So, being able to know the background of these kids has really helped. We also do an all-year SRO program. So when school's out, they don't just put me back out on the road, put me on midnight shift and let me deal with the public. They want me still dealing with kids. I mean, if you think about it, schools are never closed. I mean, you always have something going on, sports, camps, bands. We run Safety Town. We run a food pantry for our Power Pack kids that are in free and reduced lunches. So I'm involved in all that stuff. So it just keeps me 365 days a year dealing with the kids and getting to know their background and getting to know their family life, and being able to see, triggers on them, and being able to interact easier with them. Part of what we do in Revere is we're very community orientated. So we have businesses, community members that are all, we collaborate together, and so, they help us with a lot of things. We have a foundation that, any security needs I have or need or desire, they'll go ahead and give me whatever I need, which is always nice. That's always nice having an open checkbook and getting whatever you want. So they really support me that way. And just the relationships with the other departments. Like once a month, I try to meet with Copley, Fairlawn, Bath, and Richfield detectives and say, hey, what's going on in your communities? What are you guys seeing? What are you guys seeing juvenile-wise? So when one of our kids do get in trouble, they call me, give me the report, let me know what's going on. And then first, as long as it's something minor, I make contact with them and I'll have conversation with them. That's the first thing we do. And, knowing their background and interacting with them on a daily basis, I'll be able to talk to them and see what's going on. And then if it continues or if it's something that they need to be punished for, and it's not a school issue, we do things around the community. We do volunteer hours. I'll make them volunteer cleaning up garbage on the side of the road. They'll clean cars. They'll clean our jails. All kinds of stuff like that. Any kind of community events we have them to do. That's what we use as diversion. Just communication with the other police departments is huge. They deal with something, they let me know right away. I deal with something, I let them know. It's just open lines of communication. With the SRO program, just going to 4 SRO conferences and going to quarterly meetings and meeting a lot of the guys and talking to them. It seems like some juvenile guys or some SROs are voluntold they're going to be the SRO instead of being vetted. and having the experience. You know, you have a 22, not that saying that it's wrong, or it could be, you know, they can't succeed, but, you know, a 22-year-old kid fresh out of the academy being an SRO, he doesn't have kids, you know, he hasn't lived life. You know, I've coached, I've raised 3 kids, I have 5 grandkids. I'm familiar with kids. You know, somebody else that's just coming off the road or new to the road or doesn't have experience might not be able to do that. Crisis intervention training has been huge for everything we do, especially with the mental illnesses that are going on, not only with adults, with kids, and just to be able to talk to them and understand what's going on in their life. It's not always the frontal, you know, the front cortex of the brain where it's not developed as an adolescent, you know, and they make wrong decisions, rash decisions, they don't worry long term. You know, we deal through that. We understand that they're kids and they're going to do silly things because they're just not thinking, in 5 years when I go to college or when I try to apply for a job, this is going to affect me. So, you know, we always try to work up to any kind of criminal charges. And I know in Summit County, it's, you know, it's almost impossible to do anything with juvenile criminal charges, so everything's placed into diversion, you know, unless it's a major crime. So, you know, all the diversion comes through me, and Copley will call me because we have some residents on the Copley side that come to Revere, and they refer the kids to me, and I always meet with the parents, meet with them, and we have conversations and see if it's going to continue, and if it does, then we move it up to a diversion thing. That's basically what we do. Maybe I went a little bit too quick and didn't give you guys information you wanted, but you know, if you have any questions. Yes, sir.
Scott, first of all, thank you for what you do, but
Thank you.
you kind of hit on this a little bit. Most people see SROs as strictly security. Could you explain the other branches of that, education,
Okay.
mediation, and prevention?
Yeah, I'm in classrooms probably 3 times a week. I do like a street law. I'll help out with science, forensics. I go to history classes, health classes. We talk about underage drinking. So I'm in the classroom a couple times a week. You know, security is a huge part of it. You know, watching cameras, footage of things that are going on in the parking lot. But being able to be in the classrooms, be on recess with the kids, especially the younger kids, is just, that's when you see the true kid. You know, sometimes in a classroom or walking into school, you know, they're not comfortable, they're just waking up, they're grumpy, had a bad night. You know, when you get them out on the playground, you get them at lunch and they're eating, they get to talk, they get to, you know, they relax. And once they trust you, and that's huge too, the trust factor. You know, when I first started, a lot of the kids there didn't know me. They didn't trust me. You know, they looked at me as law enforcement only. I'm there to do law enforcement things only, you know, as opposed to, no, I'm here to help you any way you need. You know, I'm not only law enforcement. Obviously, if something happens, that's my major role. That's, you know, that's why I am there, for security and law enforcement. But I think it's way more than that. It's more of a somebody they can open up to, talk to you, and confide in you and be able to trust you that you're going to handle it the right and proper way. I don't know if that answered your question or if I just skirted totally around it.
No, thank you.
Okay.
The mediation teams are important because, and I know you guys do this, with school administrators, counselors, and law enforcement, to look at kids that are facing at-risk situations and getting to them prior to them committing an act that they may be sorry for the rest of their life.
And that's a key too, is working with the guidance department. You know, when they have an at-risk kid or they hear of something, or the Safer School tip lines, or we get something like that, where immediately, you know, you have your team formed, your crisis team formed, and you're looking into it instead of, you know, maybe just pushing it off or whatever. You're immediately jumping on, and the guidance departments are, you know, I meet with them once a week too, and we talk about student concerns and make sure we have eyes on kids that we need to have eyes on. Yes, sir.
Officer Dressel, thank you again for everything you did. Congratulations on the recognition
Thank you.
of your work as a
Thank you.
resource officer. I just wanted to follow up on something because you mentioned training as important. And can you share with us any training that you believe would be beneficial, not just for school resource officers, but for law enforcement as a whole, that maybe help change your perspective when you move into that
Yeah, the
position?
greatest training I ever had was crisis intervention. I mean, I use it with kids, with parents, with angry adults, visitors that come to games or whatever. It's just seeing beyond the incident you're at. You know, you go to the call, you go to the scene, or you're dealing with an incident, you're looking right at the incident. To be able to look beyond it. Why are they doing this? You know, is it a mental illness? Is it drugs? Is it, home situations? Is it something else going on? And just to be able to take that couple seconds and think, this is not, just because it looks like this, there could be something else on the outside. So using crisis intervention and those tools that we learned in those classes were invaluable. You're welcome. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you. I'm Juanita Branch, State Representative. I have a couple in training. Was that something that was mandated for all people like yourself that are working inside the schools, or was that something you just implemented and decided to take?
I actually took it before I was a school resource officer. It was offered. The chief back then thought it was a good idea to send 3 or 4 guys to it. We went, we came back, we raved about it, and Richfield ended up sending the whole department eventually through the years to make sure they get crisis intervention. But no, it is not mandated. It was, for at least for our department, that's all I can speak for. It was just an optional thing.
I have a follow-up.
Yes.
With a lot of our students, we have what they call IEPs, independent educational plans. Are you sitting in those rooms? Because I know normally you have like social workers, the teacher, the parents, and if you are having that much insight of what's going on with the child, are you being included with those IEP?
9 times out of 10, no. I do not sit in on those meetings. If there's going to be an issue, I'll be right outside, maybe hidden or in a next room or something. But usually with IEPs, 504s, or any of those plans, that's more of a school issue, and they don't want law enforcement involved. But we'll talk about it afterwards or beforehand of what's going on with guidance and the principal staff. Mhm.
I have a question.
Yes.
What age group do you interact with most? And is there a challenge to reaching a certain group of students?
Most of my time is spent, well, last year I was at the middle school. They were crazy last year, but that's besides the point. High school I spent most of my time with. So probably like 65% of my time's at the high school, maybe 30% at the middle school, and then the 2 elementary schools, which I totally love. I wish I could spend more time there because those kids are just so innocent and they actually like you. It makes your job easy. I love playing foursquare and basketball with the kids because I'm actually better than them. I can finally win at something. But usually the high school, it's just because that just seems to be where most of the problems are with that age group, juniors, seniors, and stuff like that.
And when you were talking about social media, at what age are you interacting with the students again? I mean, is there...
7th, 8th grade.
Yeah.
Middle school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there are some younger ones that do have phones, which, I don't know, whatever. But usually 7th, 8th grade, and then once they get to high school, that's where the majority of my social media is. But like last year, a lot of our 6th graders were posting things or reposting things or making threats on social media, cyberbullying, stuff like that. So it starts about 6th grade.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Because I had another question. So from your perspective, is there anything for us you would want us to consider or understand as we try to develop a standard that's not just for school resource officers, but for all officers, that would be important for us to take into consideration or do additional research on?
It's kind of a loaded question. That's a tough question because I look at everything as the SRO position. I mean that's my life right now. That's what I'm inundated with, and that's what I do, and I kind of put everything around that. I think anytime dealing with juveniles, they just need to understand. Most people do understand. Kids are kids, and until their mid-20s, they're still going to act immature and do silly things. Just most of these kids just want to be heard and want to be talked to. So training-wise and standard-wise and policy-wise, I really don't know if there's a right way to say everything with juveniles should be this, this, and this, because obviously Columbus is going to be different than Richfield. Akron City schools are going to be different than Revere schools or kids around that area. It's just that's just how it's made up that way. I think a good crisis intervention training, understanding mental health and dealing with people with mental health and anxiety issues and depression issues, that's whether it's right, false stats or not, that's just so prevalent in right now in the area, in the state of Ohio, well, across the whole country actually, but it's just everything is anxious, anxiety, and I don't know what I identify as. I don't know this. It's just the kids are going through so much right now and overwhelmed, and sometimes you just don't. I was raised in the 70s and 80s. Paddle them on the butt, and this is how it should be. It's just things have changed, and we need to evolve with that change and understand that there's more of a mental side of it as opposed to just straight law enforcement straight across the board, if that makes sense. Okay.
Any other questions?
I have a question. I was curious, earlier you talked about building trust with the kids, and of course so much of the work of the collaborative is about trying to improve the relationship, where it needs improvement between communities and law enforcement. And so, as we try to go about this work in helping agencies build that trust with their communities, and the communities have that trust in the agencies who serve them, I'm curious as to the things that you have been able to do that you think have added to your ability to build trust with the kids.
Confidentiality, first of all. My thing is, and I'm not for sure if it's right or wrong or if other places do it, but when you come to my office and talk to me or we talk, it's between you and me, unless it's something that's going to harm yourself, harm another student, or it's criminal. If you want to share something with me, that's between me and you. I'm not going to go run off and tell the principal. I'm not going to tell your mom and dad unless I have to. It's a confidence thing. And once they understand that they can talk to me about anything and they open up about it and they actually do trust that I'm not going to go rat on them or turn them in or whatever, the word gets out. It spreads like a wildfire, and they start to trust you more. And then just seeing you there in a real atmosphere. When they're eating lunches and I go down and sit with them and just sit there for a couple minutes, just kick back in a chair and sit and enjoy their conversation, talk to them about what they're going through, their normal events, what happened in this class, this teacher, not that I'm trashing teachers or anything, but, just listening to them in their normal environment, talking, or at the Friday night football games or at a basketball game, just being involved and being seen, where it's not, I'm here from 7 to 3, 2:59, here's my headlights, I'm out. It's a vested interest in their lives, and they understand that.
Final questions? Good, well, thank you again for your presentation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much.
Again, I think you get that award for 2 years since, Thank you. Do you want to introduce the next group, or?
Sure. All right, so our next presenter is Napoleon Bell. So for those of you who, I'm sure some of you probably had an opportunity, you can come on up, Napoleon, to meet Napoleon. Years ago, he was actually my neighborhood resource officer. And so I met him many, many years ago over in Eastmore, but he's a former Columbus police officer, and he is currently the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Franklin County Sheriff's Office. And he is joined by Dr. Renee Hill, who's a senior advisor at Columbus State Community College. So I'll turn it over to you. Thank you very much to both of you for being here with us today.
Very good. Very good. Thank you so much. And I think we're going to get it clear. Okay. All right. Make sure we know how to do this. Ah, yes. Okay. Very good. Well, thanks, Director Moore, for allowing us to be here to really have this conversation in regards to what we're doing in both of our agencies in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. First of all, again, I'm Napoleon Bell. I'm a certified diversity professional at the agency of Franklin County Sheriff's Office. And as Director spoke on, I was previously with the Columbus Division of Police for 12 years and then went over to the Mayor's Office for 11 years under Mayor Michael B. Coleman, and now at the Sheriff's Office, starting there in outreach and engagement, but now I'm the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And so I will let Dr. Renee introduce herself.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Bell, AD Huey, for allowing us in the collaborative, for allowing us to be able to come today. As mentioned, and I just have to, side note, I'm from Toledo, but I am the senior advisor for the Columbus State Community College Police Department. I have been with Columbus State going on 22 years as a senior executive, and based upon the vision of the police chief, he and I have had a special relationship over the years. He had a vision, and his vision was to be able to embed a diversity, equity, and inclusion person professional within the department. And so you'll hear more about that. And then I'll ask the police chief himself at the end of the presentation to be able to share what that vision was and why we were able to get to this point. I'm also a certified diversity professional as well.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. Okay, so what we first found is that when trying to put together this initiative within the sheriff's office, and I also know within Columbus State, we wanted to make sure that we had a policy that was our North Star. And so with that being said, I hope that's up there. So our North Star was within this policy. So at the Franklin County Sheriff's Office, a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace is one where all employees and volunteers feel valued and respected. We're committed to a non-discriminatory approach and to provide equal opportunity for employment and advancement in all of our divisions. We respect and value diverse life experiences and heritages, that all voices are valued and heard. We will model diversity, equity, and inclusion for the law enforcement industry and maintain an inclusive environment with an equitable treatment for all. So Columbus State had set their values as they went forward.
I feel as though I'm in hopscotch or doing one of these. At Columbus State, because we are an agency within a community college, we also value and align ourselves with the values of the institution as we serve students at the college. But as you can see, the core values that we have within the Columbus State Police Department are integrity, respect, professionalism, and community focus. And community focus is very important, and I'll get to that later. But two that I want to be able to focus on for the purposes of this presentation are, one, respect. And as you can see, we definitely demonstrate a sincere appreciation for dignity, empathy, diversity, and we want to make sure that we treat others with respect. And so that is something that we value as a department within Columbus State Community College. In addition to that, another one that I like to share is professionalism. It's about continuous improvement and being able to make sure that we demonstrate excellence in leadership and service while also striving for that continuous improvement. We work as a high-performing team. For example, we're in the process of pulling together a leadership retreat that encompasses some implicit bias, some critical and crucial conversations. We have a couple of texts that the leadership team is reading and be able to focus in on, in order to be able to infiltrate and embed, I won't say infiltrate, to embed diversity, equity, and inclusion within the department, you have to start with the top. You have to be able to have those conversations with the leadership, because the leadership, in my vernacular, they're going to carry the water. They're the ones that are going to deliver that information down into the organization. Also, and so we have speakers coming in for that. We have a 3-day retreat being planned, because it's not about intent. We can have all the best intent in the world, but it's about the impact. The impact is extremely important. as we work through diversity, equity, and inclusion. ICAT is another training that we are working on to hopefully roll out in the fall, among other things, as I will share later. And ICAT stands for Integrating Communications, Assessment, and Tactics, and it has been research, and it is research-based. I'm a researcher, an assessor, so I like to be able to do those things and make sure that the work we do is informed. Decisions have to be informed before. You just can't make decisions to be making decisions. One of our strategic goals, another thing that we are doing is establishing, this is a draft, you all get the first shot at this to be able to see, but we're establishing a strategic goal to make sure that we institutionalize diversity, equity, and inclusion within the department. So we want to, the goal is to establish a framework that institutionalizes diversity, equity, and inclusion across all Columbus State Police Department operations. This is important. Again, going back to, this is not superficial. We're just not saying it. We are doing it. And we are going to institutionalize it so that it will be there throughout our strategic plan, within our values, and the work that we do every day.
So, you know, the interesting piece of this is that both of us started right around September of last year. So it's been right about a year. Yeah. So it's been about a year, and it's been a you know, there's been a learning curve, but also there has been a lot to really learn about. Because when you start really focusing in on the agencies and start having conversations and start doing some initial trainings and understanding, that you get a much better understanding of where the agency is, where there are some gaps, where we can do better, but also we're trying to continue to weave in the culture of diversity, equity, and inclusion into the fabric of the agency. So the trends, the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion in law enforcement and the collaborative, let's talk about that. I think the first click, so in New Bloomington, police chief, you know, it was about, that was one of the first things that he wanted to make sure that diversity, equity, inclusion was part of the work there. We also have, I believe, I can't remember what order, in Florida. So the trends in Florida. So these are, what we're showing here is some of the trends in, and I'm gonna have to move forward here a little bit. Some of the trends that we're seeing around the country, right? In respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Omaha police highlight diversity in recruiting. River Forest cops offer equity and inclusion process. Washington State Patrol seek proposal for workforce diversity plan. And law enforcement conscious inclusion, building law enforcement capacity through conscious inclusion. So this is conscious and committed inclusion. So this is where, you know, where we're seeing the trends that are happening around not only the state of Ohio, but around the country. And we want to, where we're trying to pull upon those trends and pull upon those other agencies, in which we'll talk about here in just a little bit.
My apologies. I have a new grandchild and a first-time mother. I won't tell you how many calls I get a day. But in any event, what Napoleon and I decided to do was to research how many embedded diversity, equity, and inclusion officers there were across the country. Well, when we first started this journey, we could only find a few. And a few...
Literally 3 in the state of Ohio.
Yeah. And we're 2. And so, but across the country, it was, we started out with, I think, 7. We have grown to now 10, and not included on the list that you will see are 4 others. So this is something that is not occurring at a rapid pace. This is something that is happening like a sloth. It's working. I mean, we're going through that. This is something that is not necessarily a focus. Maybe the work of DEI is, but not understanding the need to embed a DEI professional within the department to be able to help and support the work, to be able to do the things in concert with the department, with the leadership. I will have to say I have strong support. I have a partner who's here today, Chief Sean Asbury, who we are doing this together, and we are walking the path to be able to make sure that the work is being done. But as you can see, there are 3 in Ohio. The third one is in Summit County, the Summit County Sheriff's Department, who, this is their second one. She just started maybe a month ago. And Baltimore, as you can see, the East Coast is heavy. East Coast has 3 within Maryland. Then there's one in University of Virginia, the Portland Office Bureau, and then the Philadelphia Police Department. There's also, we found out this week that there's more. There's one that is a commander of diversity, equity, and inclusion at the LAPD. University of Wisconsin-Madison has someone there. New York Police Department has someone there, and the York Police Department has someone there. And so we have a collaborative. And what we are doing is to be able to share some best practices, but also support each other, because this work is not easy. And we cannot do it in a vacuum. We have to do it with the support of the community. We have to do it with the support of commissions like yourselves, boards, things of that nature, and then also the leadership, because there are definite benefits to be able to have this work done. So we meet monthly, once a month. Matter of fact, we have a meeting coming up this Friday, where 4 the new ones will join us as well. But we're looking to be able to establish some best practices ourselves.
And one of the ones that I think that isn't up there that we had to connect with was Oregon State Highway Patrol. Kind of met up with them or had a conversation with them, which they had actually been doing some of the work for the last few years, although it's been, they said it was slow and methodical work. So they are just now, they're doing pretty well, although logistics plays a role there, though, also because they're so spread out, which has found to be difficult. Let me see where I'm at. So when we talk about the benefits of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, so we look at an increase in employee satisfaction, right? One of the things that we found, and that I have found in the work that I'm doing currently, is for the employee to feel valued and to be a part of the overall success of the sheriff's office. And so an increase in employee satisfaction comes out of the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Stronger, more consistent employee performance. When you feel as though you're part of the team, and it's like when I played a lot of football, when I knew that I was part of the team and I knew the overall mission and how to block, et cetera, it helped tremendously to play better. Greater diversification of skills and creativity. When you're able to be at the table and to talk about the skill sets that you have outside of maybe this particular law enforcement actions, but could benefit the sheriff's office or other agencies, and you can expound upon that, then your skills and those other skills and creativity that you have can be brought to the table and can benefit the entire agency. Going on directly addressing racism and prejudice. Being able to have those difficult conversations that we normally could not have. Those things that aren't talked about within the agency, right? That are buried deep below. So be able to have a place where you can have this conversation to be able to really work through some of these underlying issues that ultimately impact the work, that impacts the community, but also how you interact internally. A greater understanding and ability, an improved agency reputation, that goes without saying. The better that you work together internally is the better the impact is going to be externally and better awareness of you have of your community that you're there to serve. And a greater understanding and ability to empathize with each other and the community. That is huge. Often we talk about law enforcement being able to empathize with the communities that we're out there to serve, about those communities that are struggling, so that when we go to approach them out in the community, that we have a better understanding. And also if it's a community that is a refugee immigrant community or a struggling community, if you're able to understand and empathize their perspective or their perception of law enforcement, but also what they're dealing with, then we're so much farther ahead. And then that also translates from the work that we're doing internally to build those understandings, because as we know, law enforcement is not a homogenous piece, right? So we have a great amount of diversity within and perspectives within law enforcement. And so the better that we understand each other, the better that we will be able then how we deal with the public in general. Next one should be organizations with sustainable DE&I strategies. So with that, you can achieve up to 20% increase in organizational inclusion. Again, we talked about inclusion. 6.2% increase in on-the-job effort, 5% increase in employees' intent to stay. When we talk about hiring, recruiting, and retention, if you're an officer in an agency that is inclusive and that has this culture of diversity, equity, and inclusion, you're more likely to stay at that agency. Also, you're more likely to hire into that agency, because now, as we know, we have Generation Z and millennials come, as far as becoming to be able to be hired. There's expectations that they have, and there are expectations of a welcoming agency, whether it's a law enforcement agency or whether it's a Fortune 500 company, right? So we'll get them through the door, and then we'll be able to keep them at the door because they will be part of the team and they'll feel included. A nearly 3% increase in individual employee performance. That goes without saying. If you're in a place that is welcoming and that you feel part of the team, you're going to work a little harder. You're going to work a little smarter. You're not going to take those days off just to get out, from that day-to-day grind. So, with all that being said, changes start at the top.
Changes start at the top. That's extremely important, because this work cannot be done unless the buy-in is at the top and the leadership is leading the work. As I mentioned, Chief Asbury and myself are partners. He is the one that makes sure that the communication takes place within the department. As far as this is not Renee's work, this is our work, and this is what we're going to do. And so it goes back to us being not only intentional, but impactful. This is something that is outside of what is normally potentially done within law enforcement, because when I first came to the department, for example, I had some very intentional conversations with every individual that was in the department. And I had those so I could be able to understand everyone's wheelhouse, their foundation. Because there's two things that I always say, and I think a lot of people say them as well. You have to listen to understand, and you don't know what you don't know. And so what you have to do is to be able to take that off, listen. And so that is something that can be hard, because our houses are all built. I use an analogy of a house, okay? A house is built, And it's built how? First with a foundation, then a framework, then you have the plumbing, you have the gas, you have the drywall, and it goes on. And every now and then, that house has to be what? It has to be updated. It has to be fixed. And you have to understand, each of us has our own house. What I said in the beginning, that I'm from Toledo, but that doesn't make us alike. Because wherever I grew up, the house that I was in, that was my foundation. That built who I am today. However, that doesn't mean that I don't need to understand somebody else's house, because then that will help with the work. And that helps with law enforcement to be able to work with their communities. And that's what we are doing as embedded DEI professionals, to be able to help with that understanding, because diversity, equity, and inclusion are not the same. They're 3 different words with 3 different definitions. And we have to understand that. When I first had the conversations, I asked, well, can you tell me what diversity, equity, and inclusion is? I got the same answer. Can you tell me about the training that you receive? Oh, well, we do that once a year, about 8 hours. Like, okay. And we move on. Because that's where that's for me, that was my knowledge to be able to, and understanding, to be able to move the work forward. There is a quote that that we have: no amount of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts and initiatives will be successful without buy-in from organizational leaders. It has to start at the top. If it doesn't, the impact will not be there. The intent will be there, but the impact won't.
So what's our goal? It's to cultivate a work environment that is welcoming and inclusive. The work of DEI should be a core value, and I say again, a core value for the agency's officers and staff. So what's our areas of focus? How do we start off? What are we looking at? Well, workforce and leadership, inclusive leadership, right? And understanding what inclusive leadership is. A big thing is culturally competent. When we talk about, often we hear the buzzwords of implicit bias training and others, but we have to be culturally competent. When we talk about working internally and also externally, cultural competency is a key in regards to diversity, equity, inclusion, so that you understand. In Central Ohio, we have the second largest Somali population, in the country. We have a very large Hispanic population here. We have over 100 spoken languages here. And so if we must be culturally competent, workplace accessibility is a definite key point, to make sure that everyone has access, regardless of their ability. Service to diverse populations, as I just talked about. We must be aware of those diverse populations and understanding who they are and the perspectives that they have. In education, training, a campaign also as far as what we're doing, but also safe spaces. We talked about safe spaces and being able to have a conversation without fear of retribution. There's sometimes pushback that, well, we can't have that conversation because what if something illegal is said or something to that effect? We've got to be able to create spaces for people to have, for law enforcement to have conversations about where they are on particular topics and how we can address that and go forward. Mentoring, from applications to promotion. One idea that has come up that we're looking at is that to have that person that is, in a sense, assigned to you from the time that you apply and onboarding, that person can work with you, talk with you, tell you a little bit about what's going on through the application process, through hiring, through the academy process, and through hiring, and even into their career, so that you know you have that person that's there with you throughout your career. Minority recruitment, the outreach process. I know that we're going through, a whole new recruiting, hiring, and retention process. So really look at that and see if there's equity issues there or things that can really be those barriers to having a very diverse population coming in. And accountability, policies, procedures, and transparency. Policies and procedures are big. There might be some unknown areas there that are, whether it be discriminatory and or prevent barriers from people from, when we talk about an intent, whether it's intentional or unintentional, we have to make sure that we look at those and look at those with an equity lens. Also, I'm sorry, I took your part, didn't I? So going on to diversity and communications. Messaging, that is a part that we want to make sure that we do. Because when you talk about recruiting, hiring, and retention, we want to make sure our messaging shows that we are a welcoming community, that we are a welcoming agency to people from all over the community, regardless of your background or ethnicity. But we have to be able to show that in our messaging, and our core values. We want to make sure that it's our mantra. When somebody's onboarding, this is a piece that it is our mantra with the new hires and with the new recruits. Not only recruiting, but also in service with those who have been on for a while, right? To be able to have those conversations, but to be able to make sure that we are having that impact on those who are already there. The media, advertising, press releases, another piece that hopefully you have a good media person. Social media, consider diverse audiences. When you're doing your social media, if we have it all in one language, that could be problematic. Think about those who English isn't their first language, right? We have to think about that, especially if we want folk that speak different languages to come on board, right? We need to market to them and make sure that we're showing that we are inclusive. And partnerships with diverse communities. That is also big. One thing that I have recommended, and I know that some agencies do it, is that when you have your new recruits coming in, what better but through training that you have them embedded in doing community service for a week or so in the struggling communities, in different communities that you're not used to, so that you have a better understanding and build that empathy, but also build that understanding of who you're going to be out there to serve, either to serve and or the persons who are going to be right next to you within the office.
So everything that Napoleon spoke on, as far as areas of focus, et cetera, are applicable to Columbus State as well. And so for institutions of higher learning that have police departments, this is important as well. It's very important because we are a community-focused agency. We have, I'm in the process of getting ready to hire a work study student so that a work study student can come into the department that is hopefully has criminal justice as a major, to be able to see that there's more than being an officer within a police agency. There are so many different logistics. There are so many different occupations that occur or happen within an agency. Measuring success. It is important, I've said it earlier in the presentation, we just can't be doing the work because it's a good thing to do. We have to measure it. We have to assess it. We have to make sure we look at the data, because that's going to inform how we move forward. What's the diversity? And diversity just doesn't mean racial. It means a lot of different things. But understand that the focus, I'm not going to sit up here and sugarcoat. I'm going to be as authentic as I can. Color does matter. We need to make sure that we are representative of the areas that we serve. And for Columbus State, it's our community college students. We're extremely diverse. Why? We're a community college. Procurement, how we get our services, order our services, making sure that we're looking at minority-owned businesses or diverse opportunities, policies and procedures, being able to make sure, as Napoleon mentioned, that they're equitable, but making sure that we assess them every so often to see if they're effective. That's what assessment is. You know, that's part of my background is I'm a peer reviewer. You know, I'm a assessor for the Higher Learning Commission. And that's what we do. You have to make sure that the work being done is effective. If it is, then it will inform the continuous improvement. And you're meeting your accreditation standards. Assessing when you have inclusive and educational program, we can have that all day. But if we don't evaluate it to determine if it's effective, then what will we be doing? We'll just be having program after program. And it may not be working because why? We don't know, but we should know. And then the climate survey, being able to have a climate survey to be able to assess the climate, to be able to make decisions, and then also going to that assessment and evaluation protocol. For me, that's important.
And one thing I'd like to also just piggyback on is that climate survey. We did have the opportunity to do a climate survey at the Sheriff's Office of over 1,200 employees. And so that was very helpful to at least to understand where you're starting from, right? To get that feedback through the climate survey gives you real good direction on which way to start or what the priority should be when beginning your diversity, equity, and inclusion process.
And at Columbus State, we are doing one institutionally. So this will be something that will be done at the institutional level, but a nice chunk of it will be focused on the police department. Those are important. And with that,
Did you want your...
yes, I want to be able to, he reminded me, I want to be able to ask the chief to be able to understand how we got to this point, because that may be a question. How did you get here? What was the vision? If, Sean, do you want to share what that looks like? Or what that looked like? Because I'm here.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to come and share a few thoughts. You know, one of the first things that I realized early on in this process was I didn't know anything about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, quite honestly. And a lot of the initiatives that I had been involved in over the last 27 years really weren't very effective when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And quite honestly, I feel that it's probably set us back, because what it has done, from my observations, is it's created an atmosphere where our officers are afraid to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because every time that we've talked about it in the past, it's always been linked to discipline. It's been linked to some kind of training issue because of something they said or did. And all of those things keep those conversations from happening. So as I started listening to what was going on around the country about 18 months ago, and communities were calling for police departments to have conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion within the communities, I asked myself how many times I've ever been involved in those conversations within a police department. The answer to that is zero. I've never, ever been involved in a diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation within a police department in a non-structured setting. And then I asked myself, if we've never been involved in those conversations with each other, how in the world can we ever successfully engage in those conversations with our communities? I just don't know how that would be successful. So one of the things, as we started this journey, one of the things that I was committed to was, over the last 25 years, I've heard a lot of talk, and I've never seen a lot of action in this. I wanted some kind of action that I was going to be able to push forward as we kicked off this initiative. You know, some of the folks asked me why I was so slow in coming out in my position and what I was doing, and I told them, I want to be able to show you that this is serious conversation and we're going to make forward movement in this. I also realized that in the past, typically what happens when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion is we have somebody from the outside come in and tell the police departments what they're doing wrong and what they need to do to fix it. Well, that's great, but as soon as you set down that 8-hour training block and within the first 15 minutes they start talking about some of the key phrases that have happened, the officers have perceived that as, I'm a racist, and I'm not a racist, but you're calling me a racist, and I'm not going to have any more conversation about this. So after 15 minutes, they shut down. They don't hear anything else that's being said. This has to be, at least from my perspective, this has to be a way we do business. It has to be a culture shift within the law enforcement community. And the question that I asked myself, how was I going to be able to facilitate that within my organization? That was when I put together a paper, sat down and had a conversation with my vice president and our president about bringing in somebody that could partner with me to facilitate these conversations. Because I don't know all there is to know about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I don't know how to implement this within a police department. I don't know of any agency that has really successfully done it from my perspective. And if it was easy work, it would already have been done. So at that point, I got approval to bring the position on, and then I very carefully thought about who I wanted to bring into that position, because this is a position where they had to facilitate those conversations with me. It had to be a true partnership. I also wanted the work to be focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I didn't want this to be something that was off the side of their desk, because if it's just something else they're doing in addition to other things, that really sends a message as well. It sends a message that that's not important work. This is work you can do if you have time after you get everything else done. So I wanted to make sure that it was focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and everybody within the agency knew that this wasn't Renee's work. This wasn't my work. This is our work. And we're going to move this work forward as a group and as a team. And then we started having those conversations. Now, Renee talked about a leadership retreat that we're in the process of putting together right now. We've got 3 days set aside where we're headed up to Maumee State Park, and we're going to stay in the lodge, and we're going to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion for 3 days. And that's with my leadership team. Because if my leadership team doesn't understand it, if they can't have conversations about it, how are they ever going to be able to have those conversations with the officers who are going to be having conversations with the community? So that's what our focus is going to be there. And this is work that Renee and I engage in every day. And I think one of the most valuable and powerful things that I've had is I've done a lot of reading and I've done a lot of learning over the last 18 months. And it's one thing to read a book, but it's another thing to be able to sit down with somebody and say, here's what I read, and I don't understand why it is that way. I don't have that lens to look through, and Renee does. And she's willing to share what that looks like through her lens, so I at least understand. You know, there's a lot of things that our folks do every day that is fantastic work. You know, just recently we had one of our officers that was dispatched to one of our buildings on a suspicious person call. It was a two call for service. They went over, and it was immediately recognized that it wasn't a suspicious person. It was somebody that was there looking for the president's office. It was a black gentleman dressed in a 3-piece suit, carrying a leather briefcase. And the officer immediately recognized that, but the guy got irate. He was irate because somebody in the building had called the police on him, and it made him feel like a criminal. Well, there was 2 officers there, and there were 2 officers there the entire time. And as we started having conversations with the officers did what they were trained to do. They responded as they've always responded in the past. And as I started having a conversation with one of the officers, she said, I felt like I had done something wrong. So I went back and I watched my body-worn camera video to see what I did wrong. And she said, I couldn't see that I did anything wrong. I said, well, Megan, if you felt like you did something wrong, is it possible that the gentleman you were dealing with also felt the same way? Because he was there to visit the president, dressed in a 3-piece suit, knew he wasn't a threat to campus. You said it on your video, he wasn't a threat to campus. yet we still have 2 officers there interacting with him. What are we saying when we have 2 officers interacting with him just for a conversation to take him over to the president's office? And it was kind of interesting because it was like the light bulb kicked on. And she now kind of understood some of the perspective that the other person that she was having a conversation with, that lens that they were looking through. And those are the types of conversations that we have to have, I believe, in order to make sure that our folks understand that other lens, that lens that they've never looked through before. We have to have real conversations, we have to have tough conversations, and we have to have those conversations often and regularly with them. I'm now starting to see those conversations being initiated by our officers on their own, which is something I've never ever seen either. They will go over into Renee's office, they'll sit down and they'll say, here's something that happened to me today. Explain to me why that happened the way it did. And then they have a 2-hour conversation about the interaction, what they saw, and all of the different things surrounding that, whether it's racial, cultural, environmental, or whatever it is. But until those officers have the ability to understand what the other person is going through, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to fix this through training alone. This has to be a cultural shift. It has to be a change in the way our officers do business every single day. And if our purpose is to go out, interact, and take care and serve our communities, and we can do it in a way in which they're going to feel more comfortable and going to be more willing to talk to our officers, where's the downside? Where's the downside to it? So with that, I thank Renee and Napoleon for the work that they do every day, because this is long overdue, at least from my perspective. And they're definitely working on an uphill struggle, but we're definitely taking it, I feel, one step at a time and making progress. So it's a little bit of what we've been engaged in. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Yes, we're ready for Preston.
We're ready for Preston.
I don't know if anyone had any questions. I thought we'd have the chief stay up there too in case he had, gets a tough one. So, Juanita?
Thank you so much for coming here. I'm Representative Brent. I reside in Cleveland, Ohio, so I thank you guys so much for letting us know what's been very successful here in Franklin County. I have a couple questions if you guys allow me to. For one, I wanted to know, how long did it take to implement this diversity, equity, inclusion program?
Well, I don't think you have to understand diversity, equity, inclusion. It's not a program. What it is a culture shift. And so
It's a journey.
it's a journey.
Right.
And so it's continuous. It's ongoing. It's not like you can flip a switch and say, okay, we got a diversity, equity, inclusion program. But you have to have priorities, you have to have focus, but you have to understand first. Thus, with me, it was those intentional conversations to begin the work, and then also focus in on, we had a couple different priorities. One was the recruitment, hiring, and interviewing practices. Had to get those taken care of. Okay, so you focus in on diversity of the department. You focus in on equitable policies and procedures and processes. You focus in on making sure that everybody in the department begins to feel included. But it's a journey. This will never stop. Because if we look at it as a program, programs stop. This isn't stopping.
Yeah.
Well, I guess a better follow-up question, in my perspective, is how long did it take for you to develop this foundation of where we are right now? I guess it's kind of a better
So
question.
we both started in September of
September.
last year, so we've been doing it a little over a year now.
So I've been working on this since 2019. So it took some time for me to get my organization in the right place, because quite frankly, I had to figure out how I was going to steal Renee from the other vice president within the college, but she was very supportive. So this isn't something that happens fast. This is something that takes time, and something that I keep telling my leaders is this isn't something that's going to be fixed tomorrow. If it's something that could be fixed that fast, it would already be fixed. But this is a way of doing business, and this is the way we have to do business in the future. And it takes time for cultural change to occur.
And the focus is making sure that it's sustainable. I want to, at some point in my life, I'm going to retire. Breathe, both of you.
You're not allowed to retire before.
So at some point in my life, I'm going to retire. When that happens, I don't want this to go away. So that's where that embedded, sustainable, institutionalizing the work is important.
Two more questions, and then I'm gonna stop talking. What were some of the criteria needs to be able to implement this? I know you had to hire people and different things like a retreat, all those things kind of add up, but what was the
Well, I'm sorry, what-
Budgetary.
the budget?
the budgetary needs for this?
Well, for me, you know, we start off with, the climate survey didn't cost a lot, because we did that through SurveyMonkey, what have you, but the initial trainings. So initial trainings, we hired a trainer, a consultant, to train 200 of our supervisors from sergeant to major, right off the bat. So there was a budget piece there. And then also we did an executive retreat soon thereafter. And so
CDP.
Oh, right, and so to make sure that you know, we were trained, right, by the best, to get a CDP certification, a Certified Diversity Professional certification. So you want the person who is doing the work to have all the resources available. So with the certification and the training that went with it, we also have now the resources available to pull from people from around the country and their resources. So there's that budgetary piece. So I think going forward, you know, whether it's for additional consultants, for training and, you know, venues, et cetera, and, you know, as you see, we're one person, right? And so for myself, you know, we have 1,200 staff at the sheriff's office. So in some agencies, there's you know, you might look at, if you have a large agency that you're looking at, is to have maybe a couple people within the unit. Now I do utilize a diversity committee, which was put together, and so that's helpful in doing the work and spreading the message.
For me, it's a little bit different because I work at Columbus State. So being able to have the luxury of being able to partner and collaborate with different departments across the institution is important. And also Columbus State in February brought on a Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. And so our work is aligned up through that office as well, and that office has a budget. But the chief has made sure that the work that we're doing is embedded in every piece of the budget. So, and that is, again, that's going to make it sustainable also, is to be able to build those pieces. And what I'm doing is tracking everything that we're doing so that we can then, as we look at it in the next year, okay, what are we doing? What have we done? Has it worked? What do we need to continue to do, what not do, things of that nature. And there was an investment, as Napoleon mentioned, in me to be able to, even though I've been at the college going on 22 years, there's still, you know, you're never too old to learn. And the more you learn, the more you want to learn. I'm sorry, I'm just that educated. The more you learn, the more you want to learn. So I just jumped into that, and that has helped with the resources across the country. The collaborative is helping with resources. If we have a question and we're like, oh man, this one is stumping me, collaborative time, and everybody's, well, we're doing this here, we're doing that there, try this. I have started conversations, crucial or critical conversations, once a week, so that the officers can feel safe to know that they can come talk to me at any point in time. But I blocked out 3 hours once a week where I just sit and wait on y'all to come. Just come if something's on your mind. Be able to do it that way.
My last question,
Sure.
and I thank you so much,
Yep.
Director, for being so gracious with me. This is an important question for me, being a legislator. We have 2 bills that are currently going through state and local government committee. House Bill 322 and 327, those are critical race theory bills. You don't have to answer it, but you can answer it if you want to. But those bills will actually prohibit diversity, equity, and inclusion training within the state of Ohio, particularly for public employees, which are our officers. When it comes to that, has there been any thought of the State House pushing these bills and how they actually will stop this program that you guys are trying to, not program, the culture change that you guys are implementing right now?
For me, yes, conversations are taking place, but I have the luxury of working for an institution who believes in the need to be able to do this work. But diversity, equity, and inclusion doesn't have to be called diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm gonna just drop that right there.
Yeah, and so with us, no, we haven't had the discussion on it, but it's more been on the focus of the benefits of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And to the point, does it have to be called that? No. But is the work a good thing for not only law enforcement, but any agency, right? We're talking about working with your staff, your people, making sure that it's an inclusive environment, making sure that it's a welcoming environment, looking at hiring, recruiting, and retention, making sure our policies are looked at through an equity lens, right? So whatever we call it, the work is what's needed. And so regardless of what happens with that, I think the work will continue because it's needed.
I really do hope this work that you guys are doing will continue. I really enjoyed this presentation completely. And we get a lot of presentation. I think I really enjoyed this where I want to take this back home to, Cleveland, where I live, and say like, hey, aren't you guys doing this too? How can we duplicate this in Cleveland for that city where I live in? And I just really do hope that we can build this relationship. I do want to follow up with you guys and thank you guys for the directors. But this bill is very problematic, House Bill 322 and 327. I received tons of emails from constituents who really want this bill to pass, and they don't want race or diversity or inclusion being taught at their jobs or for their kids. And I just know on a basic level, critical race theory is taught in law school. So it's become very problematic that even at this point as a legislator, we have a bill that will basically stop this wonderful program you guys are having, regardless if you change the name or not, because the goal is still the same. So thank you so much.
And if, as you talk to the agencies, and that goes for any agency, if they would like to be able to have a conversation, we will be more than willing to be able to have a conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll pass around contact information. Is there any other questions for our group?
Just one, Karen. It's
Sure.
more of a statement than a question. Thank you for what you do, but the rub here is law enforcement has always been mission and program oriented, where there's a beginning and there's an end. And that was built in from the academy. And it's good to see over time that changing to philosophy and culture. And we're seeing that shift in law enforcement now, and you're seeing, in Cleveland, you're seeing that from the chief now. So we still have agencies, and John, you've experienced this. I know both Hines and I have experienced this, and Justin, you've experienced this. Unfortunately, sometimes you have to wait till people retire before the agency is prepared to take this on. Or you have to agree to move somebody into a different way of life and a different calling in life before you take this on. The agency has to be prepared and ready for this. It can't be forced.
Exactly.
It's got to be a cooperation. So thank you for what you do. I firmly am behind you in what you're doing.
That's why conversations are important. I pride myself on being a relationship manager, and it's about relationships. So whether we agree or not, I still want to be able to have that relationship. And I agree with everything you said. But for those that I can't have an impact on, I'm not spending all my time with you. I'm spending my time with those who are in the middle, because I can be able to have those conversations.
The 10 and the 90, right? We spend 90% of our time on the 10% we'll never convert.
That's
And
it.
it should exactly be the opposite, spend 90% on your 10%.
And one thing that's amazing to Renee's point is that when starting this and then sending out emails and really trying to do focus groups and all these different things, employees, staff have come through the door and they wanted to have a conversation, and which has been truly amazing because, when there's a feeling of a lack of trust in this, that, and the other, that people want to have a conversation. They really do. And so, if anything, just to give your staff and your employees a person that they know they can confide in and speak with, and to really work through some of these issues or misinformation that they're dealing with, to be able to just do that, I think has been really helpful. I've just been really glad to see that I've had deputies and civilians come through the door to just to have a conversation.
I want to thank you, all three of you, for your presentation. I mean, I focus on that very heavily, and you're right, it has to start at the top. And so, in saying that, Chief, what was the significant moment that made you see that there needed to be a change in the organization for you to be successful? I mean, was there an event or just something, or was it just long-term that you were witnessing some things that you didn't necessarily agree with, and you decided that, no, if we're going to be successful as an organization, we got to make this change? So what did you see that forced you into that, or not necessarily even forced you, that made you want to do it? Because you can't force people to do anything. So what made you want to do this?
I think when I started watching, some of the riots and some of the things that we were dealing with, 18, 24 months ago, it caused me to start asking questions. Why is this happening? The outcry for social justice and police to do things differently was loud and clear. And that's caused me to ask myself, well, what do we need to do differently? And how do we engage? Because this work is successful only if you have the trust and a collaborative partnership within your community. I mean, it has to be there, and I wasn't sure how we were going to engage that if our officers didn't even understand what the outcry was for. So, I think that was kind of the pivotal point for me, and it caused me to ask those questions. And wonder why we're doing things the way we are, and what do we need to change, and how do we get to that change. And I think that, training is just one very, very small piece of the puzzle. I mean, I believe that it is truly a culture change. Joe talked about this is the way law enforcement has always done it, and it is. And that's the way police have been trained to do things in the past. But does that mean we have to do that in the future if it doesn't make sense, or if we've found a better way to do that? And that's kind of where we're at right now. I think it's kind of interesting because there was definitely some skepticism within our agency when I rolled this out. But the farther we get into it and the deeper we get into it, the more and more our folks are starting to grab a hold of it. They're starting to engage. They're starting to ask questions. They're starting to read books. And I feel that my responsibility to my team is to make sure that I create that safe space so that we can have those difficult conversations. We can ask those difficult questions, and there's not going to be a fear of them being disciplined or fired because they're asking those questions. Those are important questions that they really need to understand. And while they don't have, the lens of being able to look through from being a black person as to what they see, they need to understand, some of the things that are seen through those lenses. So they've got the ability to navigate through that and understand the good, the bad, and the ugly of how they do their work. And I really think that, at least for me, that's where Renee has been invaluable, because we've been able to sit down and we've been able to have those conversations, and I've been able to ask those questions I probably should have known the answer to, but I didn't. And she was able to help me understand why things are the way they are and why they cause problems if they're approached in a particular way. I don't know if that answered your question, but...
No, you're on target.
Okay.
This conversation is one that is probably more important than anything else that's going on. And although, as the representative was saying, there are people who try to divert from that, and maybe that's a fear factor in itself. The importance of doing this makes the job easier for people if they understand people. But if you're not willing to talk, and if you're not willing to ask some of the questions that you've always wondered, why this, why that? If you don't do that, then you never educate people to where they understand why this may be inappropriate to this particular group of people. And I think that what you're doing is excellent. So I just want to congratulate you.
One other thing I might add is I think another problem that we've identified in our organization is that our team can't relate to some of the things that are happening. They turn the news on and they see it happening in Chicago or Minneapolis or Atlanta, but they personally don't know people that are experiencing those problems. And in reality, they've got people that work with them in their department that are experiencing those problems. So part of our work at our leadership retreat is going to be talking about the story, because I really believe that if we can link those feelings, those emotions, those understanding of what's happening and the feelings that other people within the agency are having, their friends, their partners, the people that they work with, it's going to have a completely different impact on them if they can link it to somebody they know, somebody they trust, somebody they respect. And they certainly don't want to hurt, by the things they say or the way they conduct their business. So hopefully we'll be able to have some personal connection, to what some of these things are that are going on around the country.
Chief, Dr. Bill, Director, I want to thank you again for the presentation. This has been an extremely important conversation for us to have here, and thank you for the work you've been doing. And I want to thank you for articulating it in a way that helps us go back and have those conversations in our community, because I will tell you, we've had a couple of groups in our community that have continued those conversations on diversity, equity, and inclusion at a community level, and then as a Chiefs Advisory Committee with the police department. And another conversation that I've had the fortune of being involved in is with the Police Executive Leadership College, and adding some introductory or discussion as part of that program with OACP. And sometimes when we have those conversations, we're inclined to figure out what's the right program, what is the right answer to what is a very large and long-term progress that we will have to have in our communities. And it can be overwhelming, and that's difficult for individuals, for an organization, for a community to sometimes see how are we ever going to tackle this. And to your point and the way you've articulated today, it's a journey, it's an ongoing conversation. And the importance is beginning the conversation knowing that we are going to sit in that uncomfortable conversation as long as we need to until we see progress. Because as you've articulated, sometimes the discussion is either expectations for police or meeting expectations for the community. And what you have shared with us today is really finding a way to sew together the fabrics of our community that make us strong. And through that discussion, that honest discussion and continued dialogue, we can make sure we hit both of those targets. So thank you very much for the presentation.
You're welcome. The other piece is I'm okay with silence. So, you got to give people space. So if they want to be quiet, just sit there and okay. And after about 5 minutes, okay, let me ask you this. Okay, well, I'm ready. Let's go. So be comfortable with space, and silence. It's okay.
Laura?
My name's Lori Burris. I chair the Ohio Civil Rights Commission. And unfortunately, when they get in front of, issues get in front of us, it's somebody has been harmed, right? They feel discriminated against, and it's gotten to a level that they report it because they don't have cultural shifts like you all do. And I'd love to analyze why does this happen? What could have happened in the agency to prevent or to eliminate? Because maybe you can't prevent everything, but you could eliminate and eradicate discrimination if you try. And it's often officers, I'm talking about police matters that come before us in agencies that have had or experienced discriminatory practices. and I don't see that they're taking a deep dive into the recruiting practices and where are applicants getting filtered out in the application selection process, and/or oftentimes it's a fear of retaliation. So people see their fellow officers maybe acting badly, and nobody says anything, and it escalates. And so I feel like every agency needs somebody like you who's really in tune.
And we agree with that.
And focused. And the budgetary issues, boy, it costs a lot more if you don't do it. And so that, I don't know that you can even put a dollar to not focusing on that, because it's an issue and it happens everywhere. And you can call it racism or bias. Everyone has a bias, and we've all taken the bias, implicit bias test, and we all have one.
Yeah.
So you just have to learn to talk through it and address it.
Yeah. And
One of the things you're seeing in law enforcement now is a different type of testing procedure to bring people in, because that's where it starts, right? I mean, you don't indoctrinate people after they're on the job. This has to be their fabric when they come in, so you're seeing behavioral-based testing processes that really get into personal values more than the traditional police test of, can you recognize this suspect? Well, that means nothing. But when you look at what the person's made up of and what their behavioral standards are, you get a whole different officer coming in the door. And then they start, and I hate to generalize, but you get people generally who have more life experience, they're better mediators, they're better conflict resolution, and that causes public compliments to go up and public concerns to go down, and more community engagement. So we're starting to see it in law enforcement, but it takes a while. You've got departments that they won't change until they get somebody else at the top.
I agree. Yeah.
And one thing that we're doing also is that our whole hiring, recruiting, retention process is being overhauled. And so, and to your point, now we're the recruiting process or the testing is through core competencies. And so it is changing, truly changing how we have been recruiting, how the process as far as the testing, and then afterward and after they come on. So we're actively going through that, because especially since we're in a hiring push right now because of the new correction center that's going to be opening up in March. So.
Yeah, as mentioned, I mentioned earlier that we did an overhaul on our recruitment, interviewing, as well as retention practices within the agency. And we did a deep dive. We took the whole interviewing team. They went through implicit bias training. They went through how to be able to interview, because that is, everybody just can't get up and do an interview. You have to understand what you're looking for when you're interviewing. We have a STAR method, situation, task, action, result. Okay, being able to identify what that looks like. So we did all that. Our disqualifications, we did a deep dive on that. And so it's a process, and it's about not necessarily programming as it is institutionalization. I got the word right. Making sure that it's embedded and institutionalized within the agency.
Sometimes you can see a police department and their culture through the last step of the hiring process, which is an interview panel. And depending on what that panel is made up of, you can tell the organizational culture.
Exactly.
Whether the panel has outside people from the community, the diversification of the panel. Because if the panel is very one-sided, they're going to group think, and they're going to get who they believe will be good officers because they're just like them. And that's a fatal mistake quite often.
You know, we also have a police academy at Columbus State, and we've already started having some conversations with them because, you know, dealing with police officers that are already sworn and in the communities is one issue that needs to be addressed. But we also have to deal with those officers that are coming up through the academy, because a lot of the things that we're experiencing now, officers are doing because that's the way they've been trained to do. So the question then becomes, how do you incorporate that into the police academy? You know, and conversations that we've had between you know, our academy team and us is, you know, I don't believe that this is a course that needs to be taught. This is a way the academy needs to be ran. It's a way of thinking. It needs to be infiltrated through every single course that they have in the academy. Not an additional course, but it needs to become part of the courses that are already there. You know, so that when the officers are coming out to the communities, they're already thinking differently. And they're not going to be afraid to ask those difficult questions, you know, and have those difficult conversations, because it's something that they're accustomed to, because they've already been doing it while they've been in the police academy. So, it'll be interesting to see how things happen with that piece as well.
You know, and before coming here, we were just doing some training at our training academy, and so we're making sure it's impactful training, and to have these conversations in regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And over the last few that we're doing, because we're doing in-service training, and we're also doing the new recruits. But what's interesting is that they all want this, right? They all want to have this conversation. And they all, once getting past, diversity, equity, inclusion training, oh my God, you know, or it's mandatory training, you know. But once getting past that and hearing the silence, right, in the beginning, then after you get past that, then the conversation starts to happen. And then they realize that, you know, this isn't about a black-white issue or something. They realize this is about me. This is about us and how we interact. And so that's when it just becomes, you know, that you're starting to mold it into that culture and understanding and dispelling those myths about what DE&I is. And so that's what I think is that really folk really want this. And because they can see, once getting past that stigma of DE&I, that it helps everyone.
It's like baking a cake. I mean, you got ingredients. You just pull them together and let's go. I have a bunch of analogies.
I would say build a house.
Build a house.
Well, I think that's all of our questions, but I really want to thank you for your time today. This has been very informative, and obviously I think DNI, a lot of organizations across the state are looking at this, or seeing how they can incorporate it into their, you know, organization. As I indicated, here we are at Public Safety as well. So very informative and helpful. And we'll pass around contact information, so if anyone wants to reach out to the group, they can. So thank you again.
Great.
Very much appreciate it. I think that wraps up our agenda. I'm happy to go around the table. I don't know if anyone had any comments or if we had anything for the good of the order before we wrap up. If not, we will be meeting in November 17th will be our next meeting, and we look forward to seeing everybody then. But any other comments for the good of the order? Are we good? Carlton, you got a speech ready?
I'm good. I think the mayor has
Yep.
something.
If you're all like this is great to be back face to face.
Good.
I love it.
Good.
This was an excellent meeting.
Good. Sheriff?
On the juvenile standards, to be honest, I've had more chiefs and sheriffs reach out to me about juvenile standard than I've ever seen. I'm new to this, but I've been in the collaborative area and accreditation for a long time, and there's a lot of concern on this. You mentioned that a couple years ago was talking about. Is there anything you could send out to that you worked on back then, that you're thinking this standard is kind of going into, that we can even answer people when they say, what are you looking at? That's kind of the biggest question I'm getting right now is what are you even talking about when it comes to a standard? And my answer is I have no idea. So just any help on that would be great.
Certainly, we can do that because, you know, when we started this conversation again recently, people dragged out stuff that they had worked on previously. It's a difficult standard to write, and it's conceptually it's difficult to even get your kind of head around all the things that it encompasses. So We can certainly do that. And maybe what we can do, if the chair is good with this, we can send out to everyone kind of some of the areas it could possibly touch. And then we would be very interested in getting your feedback back about that.
Carl, the one thing I think we really need to look at, because we deal a lot with symptoms, especially when we talk about juveniles, what do we do after the fact? We really need to look proactively and what do we do to avoid situations where they get in trouble?
Mm-hmm.
How do we look at touching them prior to something they'll be regretful for later in their life?
Yeah, I certainly agree with you.
Yeah, I think narrowing down the standard will help out a lot, because correct me if I'm wrong, but when we brought it up years ago, it was just so broad that we didn't know how to go about executing it, so
Yeah.
that would be extremely helpful.
Yeah, it was very broad, and you know, I'm trying to think of the last standard, one of the standards that we worked on, the bias, no, not bias free. Well, one of the standards that we recently worked on, I think we really had the same struggle with that, and I think we were able to bring it in with some focus, and I think it turned out to be a really good standard. It was the law enforcement response to mass protests. Was that the standard? Yeah, so, and that was, when we started that we kind of felt the same way, like, oh my gosh, this is the juvenile standard all over again. So we can certainly do that, and I think, getting you all's feedback will be very helpful to us. And then I think for everyone here, I'm glad you asked that question, Sheriff Streck. Keep in mind, you're here because of your expertise and knowledge, but you're also here representing a group of people. So if they have questions as well, feel free to filter those questions through us, because we're happy to answer any of those questions as well.
Well, we'll continue to work on that, and certainly reach out to folks that we think will add to that conversation as well. So we want to get it right. So anyway, I think with that we will adjourn, and we will see everyone in November. Stay safe. So thank you.
Hopefully,
Yes, we'll try.